To give a full account of the Black Prince's ruby would almost involve the recitation of the history of England from the reign of Edward III down to the present time. We shall therefore limit ourselves to a few of the most striking adventures of the precious gem. Appropriately, the story of how the ruby ended up as one of the English crown jewels contains all of the plotting, deception, family violence and bloodshed that are the common sanguine pedigree of many royal precious stones throughout history. In the middle of the 14th century, Spain was ruled by a number of petty kings whose wars, assassinations, and executions leave a general impression of bloodiness upon the mind by which all distinct detail is engulfed. It is essential however to remember that Granada was ruled by a Moorish prince, Mohammed by name, and Castile owned for Lord Don Pedro, the Cruel by title. The Moorish Mohammed, an easygoing personage, was dethroned by his brother-in-law, also Mohammed. Flying for his life, he escaped to Seville and threw himself upon the mercy of this Pedro the Cruel. After several defeats the usurper thought it best to come to Seville and arrange a peace with his foe. He accordingly repaired to the capital of Don Pedro accompanied by a numerous, and most magnificent suite. He was politely received, but the next day, by Don Pedro's order, the usurper Mohammed and all his attendants were set upon and murdered. This was done for the sake of the Moorish prince's jewels which were many and valuable. Among the treasures thus evilly acquired was the ruby now set in the crown of England. Though enriched by this spoil, Don Pedro soon felt the instability of human greatness, and in his turn had to fly for his life. His adversary was his own brother, Henry. This Henry raised a goodly army for himself composed for the most part of Gascon mercenaries. Against such a foe Don Pedro could make no stand, so he hurried to Bordeaux, where the Black Prince along with his wife Joan, called the Fair Maid of Kent, was keeping his Christmas in right royal style. This was in 1366. Don Pedro promised untold treasures to the Black Prince if he would come to his aid. Tempted by such bait, the Black Prince led his troops into Spain, fought for Don Pedro and conquered Henry for him at the Battle of Nájera on April 3, 1367. Overjoyed at this success Don Pedro presented to his deliverer then and there the splendid ruby in order to get which he had murdered. Immediately afterwards he went off to Seville to collect the rest of the promised treasure. So he said at least, but the treasure never came, and the Black Prince, after losing half his army from sickness, was obliged to quit Spain without other payment than the ruby. Here the curtain falls upon the first scene in the drama of our ruby. It rises again on the field of Agincourt, October 25, 1415. Henry V of England, with his army reduced to 15,000 men, was falling back upon Calais when at Agincourt he encountered the French king followed by an army of nearly 50,000 men. The night before the battle Henry spent in disposing his forces to the best advantage, and on the morning he arrayed himself with a gorgeousness which has been commented upon by all contemporary writers. It was the fashion for kings to go splendidly into battle, and for a handsome young king of 25 like Henry it was only natural that he should follow such a fashion to the fullest. His armor was gilt embossed, but his helmet was the theme of especial praise. The useful iron head-piece was surmounted by a rich crown garnished with rubies, sapphires and pearls. In this glittering ornament the Black Prince's ruby was a conspicuous feature. During the fight the king and his shining crown were to be seen in all parts of the field where the battle raged hottest. Henry's crown and stout iron casque did him good service on that eventful day, for it is related how the French prince, the Duke of Alençon, struck it a heavy blow with his battle-axe, which came near finishing Henry's career on the spot. Again several Frenchmen, excited by the blood-red glitter of the ruby perhaps, swore to strike Henry's crown from his head or perish in the attempt. They accordingly rushed upon him in a body but the king defended himself bravely until supported by some of his own knights. Elizabeth I was even more extravagantly fond of jewels than her father, Henry. She did not set the ruby away in her state crown but kept it by her, no doubt for the frequent bedecking of her royal person. She showed it upon one occasion to the Scotch envoy, Sir James Melville, under circumstances of peculiar interest. It was in 1564 when Elizabeth and Mary Stuart were both young women, and both were eagerly sought by every unmarried prince in Europe. Elizabeth had rejected all her offers. Mary had done the same. The English Queen was lavishing honours upon her handsome master of the horse, Robert Dudley, and was generally understood to be preparing him for a seat on the throne beside herself. At this juncture she astonished the world by announcing that she had found a husband for Mary Stuart. This husband was Robert Dudley. The Scottish Queen was considerably amazed at this proposal, and not a little annoyed at being offered for her consort a subject of such mean descent as the handsome Robert. However, she did not say nay, and Melville was sent to London to negotiate the marriage. One evening the Queen took him into her bedchamber to show him some of her most precious belongings. Melville reported to his Queen, "She showed me a fair ruby, great like a racquet ball. I desired she would either send it to my Queen or the Earl of Leicester's picture. She replied if Queen Mary would follow her counsels she would get them both in time and all she had, but she would send a diamond as a token by me." It was the Black Prince's ruby for which the envoy begged, but the poor Queen of Scots was fated never to get either the jewel or the Earl. Charles I seems to have used his father's crown at his own coronation in 1626, a ceremony which was marked by two incidents afterwards found to have been ominous. There being no purple velvet in London, Charles was robed in white velvet, which is an unlucky colour it seems, and the Queen, Henrietta Maria, a silly and obstinate girl, refused to be crowned with him, owing to their religious differences. Fortunately the great ruby was not left in the jewel house at the time of Charles' execution, for had it been there we should have heard no more of it. Everything which was found there was either melted down or sold by order of the Commonwealth. Amongst other things thus treated was the gold filigree crown of Edward the Confessor, which was broken up and sold for its weight of bullion. With the return of the Stuarts the ruby came back and ascended once more to its proper place in the crown of England. All the appliances of a coronation had to be made anew for Charles II, so that the ceremony was in consequence somewhat shorn of its impressiveness. Charles' crown was, according to an old writer, especially praiseworthy for an enormous emerald 7 inches in circumference, a large pearl and a ruby set in the middle of one of the crosses. This ruby, although not particularized, is sure to be the one we have traced thus far. It is so very much larger than any other ruby belonging to the Crown of England that whenever we find a preeminently large one mentioned in English history we may safely take it to be the Black Prince's ruby. It could be mistaken for no other stone by anyone who had ever seen it. A shining ball of blood-red fire, slightly irregular in shape, great like a racquet ball, is not so common an object that it could pass unnoticed by writers who take it upon them to describe crowns and other royal ornaments. James II gave his whole soul to the glories of his coronation, reviving ancient ceremonies and doing everything with exactness, except the most important. James used the crown made for his brother Charles, whose head was somewhat larger. The result was what might have been expected. The crown did not fit, and was with difficulty kept in its place. In October, 1841, the crown, and all that therein was, had a narrow escape of perishing unromantically by fire. The tower being then used as a military storehouse, the fire rapidly spread, and it was thought advisable to remove the crown. The keys of the strong case where the regalia is kept are in the hands of 3 different officials, all at a distance. There was no time to be lost, as the place was getting very hot, so a police inspector named Pierce with a crowbar burst through the iron bars, forced himself in and handed out the precious articles whose value is incalculable. Soldiers and policemen ran with the coronation baubles to a place of safety, and everything was eventually saved, though not before Inspector Pierce had been well nigh roasted. This is the last adventure that the Black Prince's ruby has met with, and when we last looked upon it peacefully glistening on the state crown of our late Queen Elizabeth II, it seemed hard to imagine that it had passed through so many dangers by fire and sword and had looked down on so many great scenes of royal splendor.